Hello and welcome back to the YouTube video. Today on 25.23 support tier list. Serve your content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were very few changes towards support this patch. Most notably, we saw a buff towards Swain, an adjustment towards Mel. Obviously, this was mostly focused around mid lane Mel. However, support Mel actually supports quite a bit of a player base. Hui got a nerf targeted towards mid, also does affect Hui support. And then Ashe received a nerf primarily targeted towards ADC, but she still has some level of support player base. Outside of that, isn't really that many changes going around with support at the moment. In the next patch, we are seeing a slight buff towards Braum, and I believe another buff to Swain. I want to bring him to being at least a consistent support. That seems to be the idea at the moment. And yeah, let's get into it. So the DT are going to consist of the same two champions. That is Ashe and Malphite. Ashe isn't really supported as a support anymore. She had a kind of stint back along where you could play a more like W spam, alt spam kind of like heavy build, which mostly just played into her utility. Nowadays, it just doesn't have the same level of support from the item system. It's been pretty heavily nerfed, and outside of it being buffed sometime down the line, I don't think it's ever really going to be coming back. She sits within the D tier. This is a pretty heavy lock at the moment. I would recommend completely avoiding her. In the case of Malphite, he has the kit that can function as a support, and most of the time you're obviously going to see it as like the Yasuo Malphite gimmick. It's not great. It has issues, and like you need too much gold to really be this full-on harass champion. But your general kit can definitely function here. It's like Ashe, where I don't really recommend it. It's not good. But there are, like, I mean, the premise is there, I guess you could argue. But these are the kind of picks which I'd recommend just completely avoiding at the moment. The C tier then consists of 3 champions. Actually, I'll put, so the 2 here, which I'm going to, like, leave here, are Veigar, who got buffed more recently. He's still not a good support. I don't really recommend it. It's obviously only really played with, like, the Ziggs Veigar pairing, where you kind of bop them into the cage. It just doesn't have like Veigar's numbers early onto the game are so nerfed because of his strength as like a bot laner for a while. That support Veigar just doesn't really have that much of a place anymore. It's not horrible. Like, you can definitely make it work, especially if you are able to get ahead of the curve early onto the game and you can like spike on your items, you can stack up. But this is just his weakest role, and I'd recommend avoiding it. The other pick here is Yuumi. Yuumi is intentionally kept weak. She's a frustration problem, and Riot don't like her. I mean, at this point, it feels like being viable in any, like, brackets, like, higher than, I guess you could say, Emerald. Like, I really would recommend avoiding Yuumi. She's not a good champion to kind of scale up into, like, higher elo brackets. She doesn't even perform that well in the brackets she is, like, most performant in. She's gated by pairings, and overall the kit is just not that good for, like, translating to other things. So, Yuumi is a pick which I basically recommend completely avoiding. If she's good, can be viable with like your Zeris and some of your like your champions which can like exploit the aspects of her kit which make her good. I mean, Tristana and Lucian were ones more recently, but generally though, I would recommend just avoiding the champion at the moment. The other 2 picks I'm actually going to bump up. I'm going to bump Mel up, even though I don't really like putting Mel in B because I think it's kind of disingenuous because most people still max Q on her when Emax is by far and away the best way to still play her, even with like the nerfs this patch. And I might even be next patch, but it is very sizably being nerfed next patch, so do be aware of that. Mel will probably be maybe not on the weak side, but definitely like probably weak. Yeah, I imagine she'll be under the bar, like, maybe even quite heavily. It'll be interesting to see, but yeah, for the moment, I'm going to bump her up to the B tier. She's a low B. I still wouldn't really recommend playing her as a support. I think it is just her weakest role as well. Bot lane Mel and mid lane Mel performing really well at the moment, especially if you Emax. She is probably the strongest champion in the game at the moment, if you opt into that. And Silas, I'm bumping him up. He's been putting out good numbers for support for a while now. I don't like it as much as I used to. I think like support Silas back along was a lot more snowbally and explosive back when you were not as tied to like Protobelt, and you could opt into like Electrocute and more burst orientated builds of like Storm Surge and Shadow Flame. But it doesn't perform badly, and I think if you get it in the right spots, there is definitely merit to playing him. He's also this like multi-role flex pick, which does have value. So Silas support, yeah, I think it's fine. I think I'll have him in the B tier. Probably doesn't make sense to have him in the C tier anymore because, yeah, there are spots where he can definitely be quite valuable as a support option. The other picks in the beta all kind of remain similar. It's like your Renatas, who it just isn't that supported at the moment. She's in a relatively rough state where her itemization is like, she's kind of like stuck between not really wanting to opt into these like full-on like tankier like style items like your lockets and your knight's vows, whilst also not really having as good enchanter outputs for like your redemptions and like your Helios, for example. Not to say that these items are like bad on her. In fact, they are some of her best items. It just feels like Renata's kind of stuck between two kind of archetypes at the moment. Whether Riot end up leaving her like that, only time will tell. But she hasn't really received any changes in a long time, and she's definitely one of the more neglected supports on this list. Time Kench is just not that good at the moment. I don't really recommend him. The only reason he's this high is because he's like, this is just the best elo bracket for him. He can act more as like a selfish stat checky kind of champion. The higher up you go, the less income you're traditionally going to get. And he needs income in his current state. Like, you need to be able to go hard still, because if you don't, then you just end up being so much worse than other support options around you. Galio, Shen, other supports at the moment which just don't really feel like supported on the current item system. Amumu's another one. They're not bad options, and in fact they've got relatively strong like spots where they can be played. Amumu, think with like your Samiras and your MFs into like comps which are like bad at resisting lockdown. Shen's really good into like your Leonas, for example, champions which are more auto attack based. But yeah, I also do just suffer from the item system. Maokai can go Trailblazer. He's just not amazing at the moment. Fiddlesticks I have in the beta, I don't think he's quite as bad as I say bad as some of the other options here. I don't think the options here are bad. I just think they are slightly under the bar. Maybe Fiddle could be bumped up to the A tier and it's fine, but he doesn't really support that much of a player base at the moment, and I'd say he's just, for the most part, alright. Teemo sits with the beta, and unironically underrated support for the most part. Teemo actually puts out relatively good numbers, especially just within average brackets. He scales quite nicely. His shrooms can be quite hard for just average bracket players to deal with, whether that's because they don't set up the correct amount of vision or they just don't really acknowledge where they are going to be placed. There's genuine strength for this champion. Obviously, you want to play him into like compositions which have a hard time dealing with his blind. That is like one of the biggest strengths of opting into the team support. Pantheon sits within the beta. He is just the other, I'd say, slightly weaker AD support option. I think Pyke is just slightly better with the recent Halo Blades buffs, and I think Pantheon is better as like just an opt-in option because he has a lower mastery curve, and you are just playing him as like the point-and-click like burst down support. Whereas Pyke, if you're really like comfortable on him, you've put the mastery into him, really good option at the moment. Like, I think Pyke, especially for like elite brackets, is one of the best support options to go to. For average brackets, I'd say he's just above the bar. I don't think he's insane, but I do think you can definitely get like good value out of him in his current state. Hui probably deserves to be towards the lower end of the beta now. Received a buff which was it's going to be more skewed towards lower income roles, as you are more dependent on getting the AP to kind of make up that difference in the QE damage loss. So yeah, I think I just have him towards the lower end of the beta now. I don't think he's bad, but he's definitely not as good as he was in the previous patch, so that is just something to note. Other AP options here include the likes of Xerath, who is more supported as a mid laner these days. The changes he's generally received to his kit have been more beneficial to level scaling. I don't think he's a bad supporter, and I think if you're already comfortable on him, he can be quite a solid option. But yeah, just a bit better as like a mid laner. I think Vel'Koz is the opposite. I think Vel'Koz just works a bit better as a support, which is why I recommend Vel'Koz kind of in the spots where a lot of the time you would be playing Xerath. Lux kind of sits around this area. Just requires so much gold to really be functional as a support option. I don't think she's bad, but I also don't think she's amazing. I think she's just a champion where if you're comfortable on her, you can make her work in average brackets. Definitely doesn't scale up quite as well as some of the other support options, though, like going into like Master Plus, like kind of area. Zoe, a pretty like aggressively snowball skewed support option. I think she kind of fits in the same boat as like your Elises and LeBlancs, where if you're really comfortable on these champions, they can definitely do a lot within the game, but you need to be comfortable with like the kind of general snowball nature of them. I think one of the biggest strengths of playing these champion support, though, is the fact that you don't need to focus on CSing as much, and that is some of the limitations of like your Zoes and your LeBlancs for the most part. Nico, I have her in the beta. I think she's got an incredibly skill expressive support. Another champion where into elite brackets, she definitely jumps a couple of tiers. For average brackets, I think if you're already comfortable with the like lane bully aspect of the champion, you can definitely make her work, but there's a lot of her power budget within her W, and I think you really need to understand that that is where you are going to make the difference in a lot of games. Rao sits within the beta. Unfortunate to see her player base kind of drift away quite aggressively. Like, she actually is not that popular anymore, which is, yeah, unfortunate to see, because it looked like she gained quite a bit. Riot, I think, to an extent, might have overswung slightly with her nerfs. Not to say she's bad by any means, but I don't think she's quite as good as some of the other options in the tier above her. Boom, I've also dropped down to the high end of the beta. He's being buffed next patch, and I imagine that will, like, kind of promote him back up. But Boom, I mean, even when he was really strong, it's this champion which you want to play as a counter pick more than anything, and when you play him more broadly, he just doesn't kind of like have the same level of outputs which you would want from this champion. So Boom, play him into your engage options, and he will do a lot still, like even on this patch and more next patch. Play him into enchanters, and you're really going to suffer for it, so I'd recommend avoiding those matchups more than anything. Swain, I did like list him in as being bumped up to the A tier. I don't think he's quite there yet, and I think the buffs next patch will definitely push him into the A tier, but I'm more concerned about, like, I think Swain top, mid, and bot lane will just be, I mean, especially mid and bot lane, I think he will be blatantly overpowered. Top, he will probably be solid. Support, he will be solid as well, so yeah, I think he sits in the B tier this patch, but definitely one of the big things to watch going into next patch more than anything. A tier then, relatively similar. I mean, I say relatively similar, basically the same, just minus Storm. I think Blitzcrank and Pike make for great hook options. Blitzcrank with his recent buffs, Founder's Footing, is a pretty solid, just like opt-in hook champion. Pike, if you put the time into him, is incredibly rewarding. That's always going to be the main thing to note about this champion. Morgana, with her recent like changes, has become a lot more consistent. Kind of sorts in as this pretty solid, like, I mean, just like an average bracket A tier AP support. I think she's fine and like above the bar, but I think there are just better things which I'd recommend over her, which I'll like cover in a moment. Seraphine sits in the A tier. Solid jack of all trades champion, pairs quite nicely with Ashe. That's like the main things to note about the pick. Senna is fine. I think she works quite nicely as both the kind of like opt-in support build, or even just the more selfish kind of like cleaver RFC build. I think both can work in the games where you want to opt into them. Enchanter does look to be more performant at the moment, but obviously a lot of the time people will just find it less fun. That is just like the nature of the build. Lulu still sits around here as like a solid A tier enchanter option. She is definitely one of the more elite skewed enchanters. That is always going to be something to note when playing the champion. She has definitely had a lot of power siphoned out of her because of like the nature of how you can harass with the kit and some of the tools she provides to your team. Shaco, really putting out pretty good numbers at the moment. Definitely one of the more niche options on this list, but generally like a solid AP support pick. Can cause so much disruption, and into compositions which have a hard time like disarming your boxes, really shines. Like I've played games against Shaco support where he has borderline 1v9 the game in some spots, so definitely has really high highs into certain archetypes and compositions. Some of your more generic options include like your Nautiluses, your Rakans, your Alistars, where I think if you put the time into these picks and you're really comfortable on them, they are great options. They're just great things to opt into because they'll have value in most games. Not quite S tier for like average brackets. I think some of the enchanters with just like the lower mastery curves can kind of like take the positions over them, but going into elite, these are some of the best options you can really opt into. Some of your other options include the likes of Tarek, Poppy, Zillion. They're all pretty niche, but they have spots where they can be really solid. A lot of the time they're just like I mean, especially in the case of Tarek and Zillion, like you've OTP'd them at some point if you put a lot of time into them, and they're kind of champions you can opt into every so often and get a lot of value out of them. Poppy generally is just good into high mobility compositions, and the kit she like has is really like nice for a support, being able to provide a lot of disruption, the anti-dash through the W, and being able to just knock people out of fights with the ultimate. It gives her a lot of power as a support option. Your AP picks include the likes of LeBlanc, Elise, Brand, things like this. There's also more of those Vel'Koz. These picks are really nice, just AP options. I think Brand and Vel'Koz are Okay, well, Brand, I'd say, is probably the lower mastery one of, like, the four here. I think Vel'Koz, you do want to sink some decent amount of time into to kind of, like, really reward you through, like, comboing. Elise and LeBlanc, if you put time into these champions, they are incredible. They are probably some of my favorite AP options, especially within elite brackets. For average brackets, they are demanding for champions. You need to be comfortable diving on these picks and just, like, being where you want to be on the map at the right time, because if you're not, then they end up being lackluster. They need to kind of snowball early, otherwise they are just outshined by other things later on to the game and won't have the damage really necessary to kind of execute targets. So yeah, just something to note with these picks. I'm going to move like Shaco to be with these because I think he also fits in as a really nice AP option at the moment. The other picks in the A tier include Fresh and Bard. Bard is probably the best support option in the game in, like, elite brackets. People know this. Like, he is doing really well. For average brackets, though, you will consistently see people blunder on this champion, and oftentimes, like, not make the most out of his kit, which is why I don't have him within the S tier, because there is that barrier to entry. Fresh, I think, is a genuinely underrated champion. Like, if you put time into Fresh, this pick looks pretty solid at the moment. Has put out pretty good numbers for a while now. I think it'd be nice to see Fresh get a slight buff to kind of promote him more as, like, maybe one of these, like, stronger and elite options. Whether that's just through early game power, I mean, yeah, it's up to them, but right now, yeah, I think both these picks are really good at the moment. Bard, especially, like, one of the best picks in the game, if not just outright the best pick, especially going into elite brackets. The S tier then, these are usually, like, some of your lower mastery, just, like, very generically consistent options. Leona is probably the easiest opt-in to engage support option. I think if you're already comfortable on her, she, yeah, just does what it says on the tin. Point and click CC, good long range, like, CC as well. Generically pretty tanky. Yeah, great S tier option here. Some of your other AP options include Zyra. So yeah, Zyra I think is a great S tier option because she is just, I'd say she's just the best of the AP picks. Whether that's because she has a slightly lower mastery curve, just generically outputs a lot of damage. Her recent buffs were quite nice for her. I think she, yeah, just maintains her spot here. There's not much in it. Like, you could easily put a lot of these A tier AP options in Zyra as, like, interchangeable, and yeah, but not much would really change. The other picks from the S tier, I'd like your Enchanter batch. Things like Sona, I think if you get her in the right game, really shine as good support options. Relatively low mastery curve, doesn't require a huge amount of practice, but it's pretty dependent on being played in the right spot. I would say that's the real, like, differential on this champion. Karma and Nami are, like, your really good generic options. I think these two picks are probably, like, the premier of the S tier at the moment because of their, like, just very generic outputs, making them very viable with most ADC options. Janna ends up being a bit more dependent on, like, playing into engaged compositions, whilst playing with champions which just benefit a bit more from her EAD steroid. Soraka is a really good, just generic heal and enchanter option. She's not as generic as, like, Nami and Karma. She kind of, like, relies a bit more on champions which want a lot of healing and some level of bruiser on your team to, like, really enable to carry the game. I think she shines a bit more in those like aspects. And then Milio, really low mastery curve, doesn't require a huge amount of practice. Solid to just opt into in certain games where you can get a lot of value out of the ultimate. Maybe your ADC pairing really benefits from, like, the W steroid. I think that's where he really shines as an option. And yeah, overall support hasn't really changed that much this patch, and hasn't really changed that much for a couple of patches now. I would like to see maybe some level of shake up to the meta, but Riot seem to be relatively happy with how it kind of is at the moment. And yeah, those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.